The fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly in the corporate meeting room, casting a stark, sterile glow over the polished table where I sat, my heart racing. I could feel the weight of 100 anxious eyes on me, each pair reflecting the unease that had settled like a fog over the office since I announced the decision to cut travel expenses. The murmurs of discontent swirled around the room, a cacophony of disbelief and frustration that seemed to echo my own doubts. Was I really doing what was best for the company, or was I simply blinded by ambition? "Charlotte, can you explain why we're being asked to compromise our client relationships?" A voice piped up from the back, a young analyst whose name I couldn't place. I shifted in my seat, feeling the fabric of my tailored blazer tighten around my shoulders. My determination wavered for a moment, but I forced a smile, steeling myself against the rising tide of dissent. "We need to be strategic about our spending, and this is a necessary step to ensure our financial health," I replied, trying to inject confidence into my voice, but inside a storm brewed. Images of previous meetings flashed through my mind, laughter that felt genuine, moments of triumph shared over celebratory drinks. Now those memories felt like distant echoes, overshadowed by the tension in the air. The atmosphere thickened as I glanced around the room, catching sight of familiar faces twisted in disbelief. I could see my best friend Lisa, her brow furrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had always been my sounding board, yet now I could sense her disappointment simmering just beneath the surface. I had made my choice, but the consequences loomed large, like shadows stretching across the walls of my mind. As the meeting dragged on, I could hear the awkward laughter of my colleagues in the employee lounge, a facade masking their true feelings. The sound twisted my gut, a reminder that I had opened the floodgates to resentment. My resolve to cut costs had hurt not just the company's bottom line, but the very fabric of our team. I had aimed to save the company from financial ruin, but at what cost? How had I failed to see the human toll of my ambition? The meeting ended, but the unease lingered. I could feel the weight of my decisions pressing down on me like a lead blanket. I had started this journey with a clear vision, but now I was left questioning if I had lost sight of what truly mattered. The path ahead was uncertain, and I knew I had to brace myself for the backlash that was sure to come. With each step back to my office, I felt the walls closing in, the air thick with anxiety and determination. I had to face the consequences of my choices, but I wasn't ready to back down, not yet. As I sat in my office, the walls seemed to close in, their stark white paint reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. The air was thick with tension, a palpable reminder of the unrest that had begun to fester among my team. I could hear the distant hum of voices from the employee lounge, a mix of laughter and hushed whispers that felt like daggers piercing my resolve. I had chosen to cut travel expenses, believing it was a strategic move for the company, yet I had not anticipated the fallout that would follow. In the quiet solitude of my office, I confronted the weight of my decisions. My fingers brushed against the polished surface of my desk, the coolness of the wood grounding me as I battled my growing anxiety. Memories of our last team meeting flooded my mind. The faces of my colleagues, once eager and motivated, were now clouded with disappointment. I recalled Lisa's expression, her eyes wide with disbelief as I had laid out the new budget cuts. She had always been my ally, and now I felt the distance between us grow like an insurmountable chasm. "Charlotte, we need to address this head-on," David had said during dinner the previous night, his voice tinged with frustration. I could see the concern etched on his face as he pushed his plate away, the remnants of our meal untouched. My heart had raced, a mix of anger and defensiveness swelling within me. Why couldn't he see that I was doing what was necessary? But deep down, I knew I was losing his support, and that realization gnawed at me. The stakes were rising, and I could sense the unrest simmering beneath the surface. I had hoped to maintain control over the narrative, to steer the company through these turbulent waters, but the reality was far more complex. Colleagues who had once celebrated our successes now eyed me with suspicion. I could feel the weight of their judgment, as if they were silently questioning my motives. Was I really acting in the company's best interest, or had ambition blinded me to the true cost of my decisions? As I prepared for the upcoming team meeting, my heart raced with a mix of determination and dread. I needed to regain their trust, to reassure them that I was still the leader they believed in. But how could I convince them when I was grappling with my own doubts? The thought of facing my team filled me with trepidation, yet I knew I had to confront the consequences of my actions. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. This was my chance to shift the tide, to reclaim the narrative before it spiraled further out of control. The boardroom felt like a pressure cooker, the air charged with unspoken words and simmering emotions as I stood at the front, bracing myself for the inevitable backlash. The long, polished table stretched before me like a barrier, separating me from my colleagues who were now more like adversaries. Each face reflected a mix of disappointment and anger, the fluorescent lights above casting harsh shadows that accentuated the lines of tension etched on their brows. I could almost smell the bitterness in the air, a pungent reminder of the discontent that had taken root since my announcement to cut travel expenses. "Charlotte, this decision is impacting our client relationships severely," came a voice from the side, a senior manager I had once trusted implicitly. His tone was laced with indignation, and I could see the clench of his jaw. I felt a jolt of panic surge through me, my heart racing as I struggled to maintain my composure. I had anticipated tough questions, but the ferocity of this challenge caught me off guard. "We need to adjust our strategies to stay afloat, and this is a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the company," I replied, trying to inject a false sense of confidence into my voice. But deep down, I felt the walls closing in. Memories of our team celebrating small wins together flashed through my mind, moments that now felt like relics of a happier time. My resolve felt shaky, and I could sense the skepticism in their eyes. As I continued to present our revised budget, the murmurs grew louder, a chorus of discontent that seemed to drown out my words. I could feel my palms sweating, the slickness of the table beneath my hands grounding me as I fought to keep my voice steady. The tension was palpable, like static before a storm, and I could almost taste the resentment that hung in the air. Suddenly, Lisa's voice cut through the noise, her tone surprisingly sharp. "You're putting profits over people, Charlotte. We need to invest in our relationships, not cut them off at the knees." Her words were like a dagger, and I flinched at the accusation. I had expected support from her, but now she stood as a stark reminder of the rift my decisions had caused. I felt my heart plummet. "I understand the concerns, but this move is essential for our survival," I insisted, desperately searching for a glimmer of understanding in their expressions. Yet the resentment simmered just beneath the surface, boiling over into accusations and heated exchanges. Each word felt like a weight added to my shoulders, and I could see the cracks forming in the once solid foundation of our team. As the meeting dragged on, the atmosphere suffocated me, a thick haze of frustration and desperation enveloping the room. I attempted to explain the rationale behind my decisions, but the more I spoke, the more distant they became, their expressions hardening into masks of disbelief. I could hear my own voice echoing in my head, a stark contrast to the laughter we once shared. After what felt like an eternity, the meeting concluded, but the unease lingered like a bad aftertaste. As I stepped out, the hallway buzzed with whispered discontent, snippets of conversations that stung like barbs. I could feel my stomach churn, an overwhelming sense of failure washing over me. I had aimed to save the company, yet I felt like I was losing everything that had once held us together. The following day, the consequences of my decisions crashed down upon us like a tidal wave. The announcement came through like a thunderclap. Our company was hit with a $7.3 million penalty for failing to meet client expectations, a direct result of the cuts I had made. My heart sank as I sat in my office, the news hitting me like a physical blow. The weight of my choices bore down upon me, and I could barely breathe as I processed the reality of the situation. This was my reckoning. The betrayal I had inadvertently sown among my team was now a living, breathing entity, and I had to confront it head-on. I needed to devise a plan to regain their trust, but how could I possibly mend what I had broken? As I stared at the wall, blank and unyielding, I felt the urge to hide from the storm I had unleashed. But retreat was not an option. I had to fight for my team, for my company, and most importantly, for myself. With a deep breath, I gathered my thoughts, preparing to face the music. I was determined to turn this disaster into a lesson, to find a way back to the people I had once considered allies. But the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and I knew I would have to tread carefully to avoid further alienating those I needed the most. As I began to draft my plan, I felt a mix of fear and resolve coursing through me. The stakes had never been higher, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to restore what I had lost. It was time to take responsibility for my actions and face the consequences of my ambition. The fight for redemption had begun. Sitting at my desk, surrounded by the cold, impersonal walls of my office, I contemplated the impending confrontation with my board. The news of the $7.3 million penalty loomed over me like a storm cloud, dark and unyielding. My hands trembled slightly as I traced the edges of my laptop, the smooth aluminum a poor comfort against the chaos swirling in my mind. I had to devise a plan, a way to regain the trust I had shattered among my colleagues. The familiar scent of coffee wafted through the air, a reminder of the long hours I had poured into salvaging what I could from this disaster. The corporate board meeting was scheduled for the following day, and I could hardly suppress my anxiety. I paced my office, the carpet soft beneath my feet, a stark contrast to the hard truth of my situation. My thoughts spiraled back to the last meeting with the board, where the atmosphere had been electric with tension. I could still hear the biting remarks of my fellow executives, their skepticism palpable as they challenged my decisions. Each question felt like a jab, and I had fought to maintain my composure, but inside I was unraveling. "Charlotte, how do you plan to rectify this situation?" one of the senior executives had asked, his voice laced with incredulity. I had clenched my fists under the table, feeling the anger and frustration bubble within me. I was prepared to counter their doubts with a carefully crafted plan, but as I stood before them, the words felt stuck in my throat, stifled by self-doubt and the weight of their expectations. The memory of that moment ignited a fire within me. I needed to confront this head-on, to show them that I was still capable of leading. As I considered my strategy, I felt a flicker of resolve. I had to turn this setback into an opportunity. I envisioned a comprehensive plan to not only address the financial penalty, but also to rebuild the morale of my team. The idea of hosting a company-wide meeting to openly discuss our path forward began to take shape in my mind. I could almost hear the murmur of my colleagues, their voices a mix of skepticism and hope as I laid out my vision for recovery. Later that evening, I returned home, the weight of the day still clinging to me. David was waiting at the dinner table, his expression a mixture of concern and weariness. The tension between us had become a constant companion since the announcement of the budget cuts, and I could sense that he was struggling to reconcile the ambitious executive with the person I was at home. "Have you thought about how you'll address the board?" he asked cautiously, his fork hovering above his plate. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, a reflection of his internal conflict about my choices. The warmth of our home felt cold in that moment, the air thick with unspoken words. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I need to lay out a plan that not only mitigates the penalties but also demonstrates our commitment to our clients and team," I replied, my voice tinged with determination. "I want to show them that we can recover from this, that I can lead us back to stability." I could see the flicker of hope in his gaze, but there was also doubt. "Just be careful, Charlotte. You can't let ambition blind you again," he warned, and though his words stung, I knew he was right. I had to balance my drive with empathy, understanding that the lives of my colleagues were intertwined with the decisions I made. As I lay in bed that night, the shadows of doubt crept back in, whispering reminders of my failures. The echoes of my colleagues' disappointment haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the brink of losing everything: my career, my reputation, and even the support of those I loved. But I had made my choice. I had to confront my mother in the next board meeting. Her influence loomed large over the company, and I knew that she would push for her vision of control, one that often clashed with my own. My resolve hardened. I steeled myself for the battle ahead, understanding that redemption would not come easily but was necessary for survival. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of my home office, casting a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the turmoil swirling within me. I sat at my desk, the familiar scent of fresh coffee wafting from the kitchen, but it did little to soothe my frayed nerves. My thoughts raced as I contemplated the aftermath of recent events. The fallout from my decisions had begun to carve deep fissures in my relationships, and I knew I had to face my colleagues if there was any hope of mending what had been broken. I could still hear the echoes of the heated discussions in the boardroom, the weight of disbelief hanging in the air like a thick fog. My heart raced as I reflected on Lisa's piercing words during the meeting: "You're putting profits over people, Charlotte." Those words had struck a chord deep within me, and I realized I had to reach out to her before the rift widened further. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed her number, the anticipation a tight knot in my stomach. As the phone rang, I recalled the countless times Lisa had been my confidant, her laughter a balm for my worries. But now I feared that laughter had turned into a sound of betrayal. "Hey, it's me," I said when she finally picked up, my voice wavering. "Can we talk? I know things have been tense." I need to explain myself. There was a long pause on the other end, and my heart sank as I held my breath, waiting for her response. "I don't know, Charlotte. It's hard to see past the anger right now," she finally replied, her tone laced with hurt. The weight of her disappointment felt like a lead weight in my chest. I swallowed hard, determination surging through me. "I understand. I messed up, and I didn't consider how my decisions would affect you and everyone else. I want to make it right, and I'm willing to listen if you are. I'm meeting some people for coffee later, and I'd really like you to join us, just to talk things through," I offered, hoping that my sincerity would reach her. "Okay, I'll think about it," she said, her voice softer now. I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me as we ended the call. Perhaps this was the first step towards rebuilding trust, one small gesture at a time. Later that morning, I arrived at the cafe, the rich aroma of roasted beans mingling with the sweet scent of pastries. I took a deep breath, the vibrant atmosphere a stark contrast to the weight on my shoulders. I spotted David seated at a corner table, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity as I approached. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, attempting a lighthearted tone, but I could see the worry in his eyes. I sat down, my palms clammy against the cool metal of the table. "I'm trying to reach out and fix things with Lisa and the team," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's good, but you need to be careful. You can't just smooth things over with a few words. They need to see genuine change, Charlotte," he cautioned, his gaze steady and serious. I nodded, the truth of his words settling heavily in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't enough to merely apologize, I had to prove that I could be the leader they needed. As we talked, I felt the weight of my decisions pressing down on me, but there was also a glimmer of realization that I could take steps toward redemption. I envisioned a plan, a meeting where I could openly acknowledge my mistakes, listen to their grievances, and lay out a path forward that included their voices. It would be a risk, but I was ready to take it. Later that day, I sent out an email inviting the team for an open discussion. The responses poured in, each one a mix of skepticism and hope. As the hours passed, the anticipation of the upcoming meeting filled me with a sense of purpose. I knew I had a long way to go, but this was a start, a small flicker of light in the darkness of my recent choices. Perhaps, just perhaps, I could turn the tide and rebuild the trust I had so carelessly shattered. The journey ahead would be difficult, but I was determined to face it head-on, ready to embrace the consequences of my actions and the challenge of mending broken relationships. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of my coffee cup seep into my palms. This was my chance to reclaim not just my role but my integrity, and I was ready to fight for it. As I stood in the final meeting room, a sense of impending doom wrapped around me like a heavy fog. The walls, once a sterile white, now felt like they were closing in, amplifying the anxious rhythm of my heart. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, but it did little to drown out the cacophony of my racing thoughts. This was it, the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated. I was about to confront my colleagues, not just to explain the consequences of my choices, but to take full responsibility for the chaos I had unleashed. The room buzzed with tension, a tangible energy that crackled in the air as I faced the assembled team. Familiar faces stared back at me, their expressions a mix of skepticism and muted anger. I could feel my palms dampening against the cool surface of the table, a physical manifestation of my internal struggle. Memories of laughter and camaraderie flashed through my mind, memories now tainted by betrayal and resentment. The weight of their disappointment hung heavily in the air, a silent accusation that pierced through my resolve. I cleared my throat, trying to steady my voice as I began to speak. "I know I've made decisions that have hurt our team and the trust we built together. I can't change what happened, but I can assure you that I am committed to making things right." Each word felt like a small step toward redemption, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes, as if they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Charlotte, how can we trust you again?" One voice chimed in, the bitterness unmistakable. I felt my heart sink further, but I pressed on, determined to be vulnerable. "I understand your anger. I've been reflecting on my decisions and the impact they've had. I'm here to listen and to work with you to rebuild our trust. I want to hear your thoughts and ideas for moving forward." As I spoke, I realized that this wasn't just about salvaging my reputation. It was about restoring the bonds of our team. Their responses were hesitant at first, but there was a shift in the atmosphere, a flicker of willingness to engage. I could see that the walls they had built around their disappointment were beginning to crack. This was my turning point, a chance to confront the consequences of my ambition and take the first steps toward mending what I had broken. I felt a surge of determination wash over me, and I knew I had to embrace this path of accountability. I was ready to fight for my team and our future, to turn the tide of betrayal into a lesson learned. As we began to discuss our next steps, I could feel the heaviness in the room start to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the glimmer of hope that perhaps I could redeem myself after all. The dim light of my office cast long shadows as I sat at my desk, the weight of recent events pressing down on me like a heavy shroud. My mind buzzed with thoughts of betrayal and regret, and the air around me felt thick with a sense of impending confrontation. I was determined to chart a new course, one that would not only restore my reputation but also reclaim my power in this tumultuous corporate environment. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, a bitter reminder of the sleepless nights I had endured. I took a deep breath, letting the aroma fill my senses as I began to outline my plan. It needed to be strategic yet bold, something that would show my colleagues I was serious about making amends while also establishing my authority. I envisioned a meeting where I could not only apologize but also present a clear path forward, one that included their voices and concerns. The thought of addressing the team filled me with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Would they see my sincerity, or would they continue to view me as the enemy? As I scribbled notes on a crisp white notepad, memories of our previous camaraderie flooded my mind. Laughter shared during team lunches, the thrill of late-night brainstorming sessions. Those moments felt like a distant dream, overshadowed by the chasm my decisions had created. I had to bridge that gap, to remind them of the leader I once was and the vision we could still share. The stakes were higher than ever, and I could feel the tension coiling within me like a tightly wound spring. I had to confront my mother, too, in the upcoming board meeting. Her relentless ambition had always driven me, but now it loomed like a storm cloud over my plans. I would need to stand my ground against her influence and make it clear that I was ready to lead, not merely follow. With each passing moment, my resolve solidified. I would not allow fear to paralyze me any longer. I was determined to take back control, to transform my mistakes into a catalyst for growth, not just for myself but for the entire team. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I was ready to face the challenge. The time for action was now, and I would ensure that my next steps would resonate through the halls of our company, a testament to my commitment to redemption and leadership. The boardroom felt like a battlefield, the air thick with tension as I stood at the front, my heart pounding in my chest. The polished table stretched between me and my colleagues, a chasm of distrust that seemed insurmountable. I could see their faces, some hardened with anger, others etched with disappointment. The weight of their judgment pressed down on me, and I could almost hear the echoes of our past camaraderie, now replaced by a heavy silence that felt suffocating. As I cleared my throat to speak, the fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a cold, harsh glow over the room. My hands trembled slightly as I placed them on the table, the cool surface grounding me in this moment of reckoning. I had spent countless hours preparing for this confrontation, envisioning the words that would bridge the chasm I had created, but now they felt inadequate against the raw emotion in the room. I stand before you today to take full responsibility for the decisions that led us here, I began, my voice steady despite the turbulence within. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues boring into me, a mixture of skepticism and expectancy. The memory of Lisa's words, "You're putting profits over people," echoed in my mind, fueling my resolve. I had to show them that I was more than just the decisions I had made. I know that the cuts I implemented have hurt not just our bottom line but our relationships, our team spirit. I didn't foresee the consequences of my ambition, and for that, I am truly sorry, I continued, my voice rising with conviction. The murmurs of disbelief began to ripple through the room, but I pressed on, determined to convey my sincerity. As I spoke, I caught sight of David seated at the back, his expression a mix of concern and hope. It reminded me of the countless discussions we had shared, his unwavering support now tinged with doubt. I knew I had to regain not just the trust of my colleagues, but also the faith of the one person who had always believed in me. I am committed to turning this around. I propose we hold an open forum where everyone can voice their concerns and ideas. I want to rebuild our team, not just as colleagues, but as a family. Together, we can forge a path forward that prioritizes both our financial health and our values, I declared, feeling a surge of adrenaline as the words left my lips. The room was silent for a moment, and I could feel the collective breath being held. Then, slowly, a hand rose, one of the senior managers who had previously challenged me during meetings. "Charlotte, that's a start, but actions speak louder than words. How do we know you won't let ambition cloud your judgment again?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, piercing through the fragile hope I had begun to build. "I understand your skepticism, and I don't expect trust to be rebuilt overnight, but I promise to be transparent and accountable moving forward. We will establish regular check-ins, and I will invite your input on decisions that affect our team." "I want to earn back your trust one step at a time," I replied, my heart racing with the weight of my promises. As the discussions began to unfold, I could feel the tension slowly dissipating, replaced by cautious optimism. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental, a step closer to healing the wounds I had inflicted. In that moment, I realized that while the road ahead would be challenging, I was ready to walk it, not just as a leader but as a teammate, working alongside those I had once led astray. The stakes were higher than ever, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me, a signal that perhaps redemption was within reach. The quiet of my home felt surreal after the tumult of the boardroom. The walls, once stark and imposing, now seemed to cradle me in their embrace, offering a moment of respite from the chaos outside. The lingering scent of coffee and the faint sound of birds chirping outside provided an odd comfort, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged through my professional life. I sat on the edge of the couch, my fingers tracing the fabric, feeling the texture beneath my touch, grounding me in this moment of reflection. In the aftermath of the meeting, I had felt a shift, a subtle yet profound change in the air. The tension that had once threatened to suffocate me began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism. I recalled the expressions on my colleagues' faces as I spoke, some still skeptical, others tentatively hopeful. I had laid bare my vulnerabilities, and in doing so, I had forged a fragile connection that had been absent for far too long. I remembered Lisa's hesitant smile as she left the meeting, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. I had taken the first step toward mending the rift my decisions had created. The burden of my choices still weighed heavily on my heart, but now there was also a flicker of hope igniting within me. I could almost hear David's voice in my mind, urging me to find balance, to lead with both ambition and empathy. As I sat there, I envisioned the future, one where I could rebuild not just my reputation but also the trust I had shattered. I knew it would take time, effort, and a willingness to be vulnerable with my team. I resolved to be transparent, to invite their input, and to ensure that decisions were made collaboratively. The thought of facing my mother again filled me with trepidation. Her expectations loomed large, but I was ready to assert my vision against hers. With a deep breath, I finally felt a sense of closure wash over me. I had learned that ambition, when unchecked, could lead to devastating consequences, but I also realized that it could be a catalyst for growth and change. I was determined to embrace this new chapter, one that would allow me to navigate the complexities of leadership with integrity. I stood up, feeling the weight of my past choices begin to lift, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey would be challenging, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready to reclaim my narrative, to shape my future with intention and purpose. As I prepared to step into the next phase of my life, I felt a sense of peace settle within me. I was committed to making amends, to ensuring that my decisions would be guided by a deeper understanding of the human element at play. In that moment, I understood that my journey toward redemption had only just begun, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. This was not just about restoring trust. It was about forging a new path forward, one where I could lead with compassion and wisdom. I stepped towards the window, letting the sunlight wash over me, illuminating the possibilities that lay ahead. I was Charlotte, a leader renewed, and I was ready to face the world once more. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over my home office, where I sat reflecting on the tumultuous journey I had faced. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine from the garden outside, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once engulfed my life. I could still feel the echoes of my colleagues' voices, their skepticism and hope intertwining, as I had laid bare my mistakes in that boardroom. The memories played like a film reel in my mind, flickering images of disappointment, tension, and ultimately, the fragile beginnings of reconciliation. My fingers brushed the smooth surface of my desk, grounding me as I contemplated the path I had chosen. "You're putting profits over people, Charlotte," Lisa's words echoed, a reminder of how far I had strayed from the core values that once defined our team. I had been so focused on the bottom line that I had lost sight of the human element, the very heartbeat of our company. As I sat in the soft light, I felt a renewed sense of purpose swell within me. I was determined to not only restore what I had lost but to build something stronger, a culture built on trust and collaboration. I envisioned a future where my decisions would reflect a balance of ambition and empathy, where each voice mattered, and where we could collectively navigate the complexities of our industry. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to embrace it. The lesson was clear: every choice carried weight, and the consequences rippled far beyond the boardroom. I had learned that true leadership was about lifting others up, not just steering the ship. As I prepared to share my story, I felt a surge of hope and anticipation for what lay ahead. I wanted others to understand that redemption was possible, that one could rise from the ashes of mistakes with newfound wisdom. It was time to make a difference, not just in my life but in the lives of those around me.